Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show, we're talking about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Arrow, as well as the latest episode of Legends of Tomorrow. Like always, if I'm talking about something that you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include the time when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So, for example, if you want to hear what I say about this week's episode of Arrow, you can skip to what I had to say about this week's episode of Legends of Tomorrow. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is this week's episode of Arrow. Quite a few things went down in this episode, so let's break everything down. Obviously, we say in the continuation of the whole situation with Felicity, her kind of willing to cross the line to the point of torturing, which Renee is kind of being like, that's a big no, because, you know, it's like once you cross that line, there's no going back. It's just like killing someone once you've done that, like, intentionally done it, because obviously there's the whole situation of like the whole situation back in season 4 that kind of Felicity kind of blamed herself for quite a bit in season 4. That whole situation like kind of had nowhere else to send the what was it, like the bombs or the missiles or whatever, so she ended up like basically destroying it out. That whole situation. So now it's more of an intentional thing of the fact is that like, oh yeah, I'm actively going to hurt this person, because that's something she's never done. That's something she's ever had to do. Oliver's done that in his past, but even then he kind of waned away from that because that was something he didn't want to do anymore. But like the thing is, once you do that, there's no going back. Because even Renee's like, I made that mistake and it's haunted me every day. And he's like, when Tobias tortured me, that was kind of karma coming back to me for me doing what I did. You know, because it's not just him. Even Laurel, who she goes to for help to torture Silencer, it's like, the fact of the matter is, even Laurel was like, once you cross that line, there's no going back. It's like, I did it. I crossed over that line because I got consumed. You know, after your grief goes away, you're consumed by rage and revenge. And, you know, after losing the two important people to her on her earth, that being her dad and Oliver, she kind of lost it. And then she's just kind of been killing ever since. And it's just kind of like, she doesn't want that for Felicity, because the fact of the matter is, once you go down that route, once you go down that deep, dark hole, it's very hard to like drag yourself back into the light. But for Felicity, it's once again that thought process of like, I don't have anything left. My family's all gone. I'm just, you know, so much was taken from me. So if I have to cross this line, like, there's no going back to her old life. So she feels like, if I have to be this person to get this done, it's fine. Like, I'll find some way to bring my family back together. We'll kind of go forward like this. But, you know, it's just one of those things of just kind of her not being able to see, like, beyond a certain point. She's just so focused on her hatred and her anger and her revenge right now that she's not willing to really think about the future to that extent, you know? But it is kind of interesting that Laura would kind of show. I mean, obviously, it's showing the fact is that Laura, obviously, she's still kind of bad enough, you know, in that in between good and evil situation that she's able to torture Silencer. I mean, granted, but even she's kind of willing to be like, well, yeah, I know if we go too far, we'll kill her, which we need her alive, because if we don't have her alive, we have nothing. Which Felicity was like, well, if with her alive, we still have nothing anyway, even while we're torturing her and stuff like that. So it's just an interesting situation. I thought it was kind of interesting. They faked it out and made it so that she could get away just so that they can track her. But now comes the conversation of, if we track her back to Diaz, which they don't know about Diaz's crazy strength boost. But yeah, if we track him to Diaz, are we going to be willing to cross that line and kill him? Because an interesting thing that comes up is that Laurel is kind of like, oh yeah, I like this new Felicity and stuff like that. It kind of remind me of Earth 2 Felicity. It's like, oh, what about her? Oh, you know me in Earth 2? It's like, yeah, everyone knows you. You kind of run an empire. I guess she's kind of like a crime boss or something, the way that's kind of insinuating. I mean, she might be something more. I mean, you don't know. I mean, you look at different situations, like Laurel on Earth 1 was never metahuman, but Laurel on Earth 2 was. Barry's not a speedster on Earth 2, but obviously on Earth 1 he is. So there's that whole situation of, you don't know Felicity might be a metahuman, or, you know, she might kind of be like a version, like she might be like Adam, you know, in the sense of like being like Ray, where she has a high-tech gear and stuff, like kind of operating in that. But it seems like she is scary in the other world. And you know what, it's actually something kind of interesting that I didn't even think about till now. The only people we've ever seen from Earth 2 were Team Flash. I mean, to be fair, that's where the multiverse kind of really starts with the Flash. So it's kind of like, if there's anything there, of course it's going to be the focus of that. But it's like, we never got to really see where everything else. So, I mean, obviously we know Oliver's dead in that world, because I don't remember if they expressly talked about it or things. No, I think they did expressly talk about it, like Oliver's dad is the one. It's kind of like the whole, Flashpoint situation of, well, maybe they didn't talk about that. I don't remember. Honestly, I don't remember. Or maybe I'm confusing it with Flashpoint itself about like the change. I think so. I think they did kind of like a Flashpoint thing on Earth 2 where it's like, you know, Thomas Wayne is the one that becomes Batman instead of Bruce. I think the same thing might be in this one, that like Oliver's dad became the Green Arrow. I'm pretty sure that's how things operate on Earth 2, but it's like, we've never seen anyone else. Like, we never saw anyone from Team Arrow. Laurel from Earth 2 was like our first instance of that. Don't ever get to see the Legends either, but to be fair, at the time of us kind of really diving into, Earth 2 back in season 2 of, The Flash, the Legends hadn't been established yet. The show might have been I think it was at least at that point, maybe going on around the time. At the very least, they weren't established like they are now, so that's extra reasons behind it. But it's just kind of an interesting thing. Also, side note, I'm really going to quickly interject and say this. I've been meaning to keep including it in every like other thing, but I keep forgetting. It's the whole Bebo thing. That is crazy. That is officially the mascot of the Arrowverse, which obviously it plays a big part in Legends. That's why you see it pop up there so much. But it's popped up. I think it was in this week's episode of Supergirl, but I forgot to talk about it. I think it's popped up this season in The Flash too, hasn't it? I could be misremembering, but I remember it's popped up a few times already, and it's like, man, that thing is just all over the place. The brand is strong with Bebo. I just think that's so interesting. I mean, obviously, it's like it can only go stronger from here, because especially the role that Bebo played in season 3's finale of Legends. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's kind of to be expected. I just think it's kind of interesting. That seems like it's kind of the mascot of this universe, but nevertheless. The big thing going forward with a lot of other situations is the whole, it's an interesting thing, because obviously there's a conversation of like, well, where do we go with this whole like the police and the whole vigilante situation, in the sense of like, you know, Dinah's trying to keep everything good. It's like, oh, the Glades is in the situation that it's in, but there's not enough police to really go around, because the police force hasn't recovered from the whole Diaz situation. It's recovered a substantial amount, but not nearly to the amount needed to cover everywhere in Star City and the Glades. It's just like, there's just not enough going around. And the people in the Glades are like, things were better with the vigilantes. The mayor, not too keen on the whole vigilante thing. She's, you know, because I guess she's one of those people that push for the whole anti-vigilante thing. And it's just like, oh, you're just trying to score points because you're like, oh, I caught the new Green Arrow. That's at least what Renee's perspective is. And it is that situation, because she tries to paint it as like, oh yeah, like most likely this other Green Arrow is the one who started the fire. It's like, why would you assume that? Like there was no information to suggest that. And even Dinah was kind of reluctant to kind of believe, because I think for her, it's just kind of like, yeah, she knew the original Green Arrow. So it's like anyone under that hood is like, we don't know who they are. So she's reluctant to trust them. But her whole perspective on that, I think, is kind of interesting. I mean, obviously, I was actually shocked when she actually did arrest Renee, but Renee did kind of get in the way and everything. But it is the thing of like, she warned him, because once again, I can understand her reasoning, because it's like, the city has lost faith in cops, which after everything Diaz did, you know, it's like, it's understandable, but it's like, she's trying her best to lead cops so that the city can feel like, no, these guys are heroes. These men and women are putting on this uniform to protect you. They are here. Like, this isn't like before. We're like, you know, we're here for you. And it's kind of hard to do that, especially when the force isn't back to 100%. And also, it's kind of all on Dinah to kind of run things. And it's just kind of a lot on her table. And it actually led to an interesting conversation between her and Diggle about the whole aspect of like, is that all there is to it? Because for Dinah, it's like basically living in the shadows, going all vigilante. It's like, we did good, but it's like, there's so much of a cost with that life of like, Oliver getting arrested, her losing Vincent, all the time she spent in undercover, and isn't just specific about vigilantes, but that world of living in the shadows, kind of like living like that is not the easiest thing. And it's like for her, she had to walk away from it because it's like so much happens in the shadows, and it's just kind of like if you're not out in the light, you're just kind of worried that you might not kind of similar to the whole Felicity thing of like you might not kind of come back, you know. So she kind of had to step away because she's probably afraid like if she went down that route, she wouldn't be able to kind of come back. But also, like I said, it's just for the sake of like, I want this city to be able to believe in the cops again, like believe in the legal system. Like, but Diggle kind of suggests that the fact of the matter is, take Lance, for example. Lance was able to see both sides of things. Like, obviously, we saw Lance at the beginning. He was not too keen about the whole vigilante situation, but eventually he grew to accept it and even work alongside Oliver, helping both sides of Oliver. One side is both the mayor and one side of him as the vigilante Green Arrow. So it's kind of like Quentin saw that balance, and like maybe you should think about that too. So, because an interesting thing is following rules is kind of a new thing for both of them, because neither one of them had to do it for a long time. Because like even when she was a cop, like there was that period where she was like after like the particle accelerator, she was so like intent on revenge that she kind of didn't follow orders back then, and Diggle hasn't had to follow any until he joined Argus. So it's like it's hard to kind of, you know, it's like you try to play by the rules, but it's just like the rules kind of confine you and it kind of complicates things. So but her and Renee joined forces along with the Green Arrow to stop the guys that were starting all the fires, because this is all about some dude buying up all these properties that are getting burned up in the Glades, which is interesting because it seems like this all ties back to the future in a sense, because they come back to Star City. Star City is pretty much a wreck. William and Rory do. And they run into Dinah, who ends up beating up some cops, because it turns out the cops are a military force for the Glades, because the Glades have basically risen up, and now Star City is kind of like outlaw lands, and the cops are used to block all people that are, not, outside of the walls of the Glades, which is kind of interesting, like what exactly led to that situation. I'm wondering, is it some Ricardo Diaz situations? Because what's also interesting too is, like, obviously, once again, I'm not 100% sure. I assumed this was kind of supposed to be like a 2049 thing, but maybe it's not. Kind of like I said, I feel like that's still kind of set up as the future, so that continuity from Legend Season 1 is still there. But what was making me wonder is, like, let's not forget Zari's time period is kind of from around here, because she's from 2044, right? Yeah. So she has her whole Argus situation, so it's not just Star City that's in this position. It's everywhere else, too. So I'm still aiming and thinking the fact is it's going to end up being William under that hood. I also think it's kind of interesting. I mean, I think that kind of speaks volumes too. When you look at the Green Arrow doesn't like shoot an arrow through people, just tying them up and stuff like that. I mean, it could easily just be like, oh, I'm gonna shoot an arrow through you, not really care. But the fact is that this person cares enough to just tie someone's legs up like that, like might kind of like pull them or yank them, but it's never like, oh, I pierced through you to pull on you. You get what I'm trying to say? Like, it's just doesn't seem like they have any intent to kill. So I'm strongly believing it's William, especially because Dinah made such a point of being like, I don't know if I can trust the person under the hood. I know Oliver, but we don't know who this person under the hood is. And it's like, okay, so it's got to be someone that you end up knowing. So, like, obviously in some shape or form, what's going down in the future has some shape or form tied to the future. And I'm guessing all these properties getting built up, I'm assuming this is connected to Diaz, like he's trying to hollow out the city and make this kind of his stomping ground. I don't know. Maybe what goes on in the future has nothing to do with Diaz. Maybe he's kind of laying the groundwork for something else that's going to potentially come to Star City and kind of shake things up. Who knows? What's also interesting is Dinah was talking about the fact that things are different, and you look at her throat and it's slit. Like, they made a point to point that out, to be like, oh, you see her knife, like the guy walking towards her with a knife. Luckily nothing happened, but it's like, oh, she doesn't have her powers in the future. Just because I guess, like, when he cut her, whenever her throat got cut, which I'm assuming that might have been a Diaz situation, that it did recover. Like, there's probably, like, no healing that once whatever happened was severed. Or, I mean, it might not just been a simple cut. There might have been something else done to make it so she doesn't have her powers. But we see that Zoe is her apprentice, which is interesting because she, present day, gave Zoe that little canary pendant. So it's like, okay, so it's like I said, I like what they're doing with like they're showing you stuff from the future, hinting like, oh, this something in the present day is going to lead to that, while also showing stuff from present day, and it's like, oh, look at us turn around and show you what the results of that has been. So to know what the Green Arrow knows, all the intel and stuff like that, the list that they have, it's interesting because I felt like it has to be a hit list from the future. These are critical targets to hit to kind of make sure that that future doesn't come about. I'm fairly certain of it. But for me, I strongly believe that to be what this is all about. Once again, I could turn out to be completely wrong, but for now, that's where my running theory / hypothesis is on that front. So we'll see in the long run, because it turns out like apparently Felicity is dead in the future. Obviously, as we saw too, the building is like smoke industry, so this does play into like, oh yeah, this totally is that same future. So. And the fact is, it's run down and stuff like that, exactly how it looked in 2049. Seems like that is the case. Like I said, once again, we'll have to wait and see. What was also interesting too is that it's like, oh, your dad, like blah blah blah. Like Roy had brought up her dad, and it was kind of like, oh yeah, like apparently, she's like, my dad wouldn't be caught, in Star City, so it's like. Is that kind of referencing the fact is that he's in the Glades? I mean, him having the connection he does to the Glades, like, are they not on good terms? Is he in the Glades while she's on the outside? Or is he somewhere else, like, doing some other stuff? And I don't know. It didn't sound like it was like, oh, like he's dead. It seems like he's alive and well. It's just kind of like he's not there. I kind of felt like it was leaning more towards like, oh, he's in the Glades and he's kind of a bad guy now, potentially. At least him and Zoe are at odds, which is also interesting because it turns out Zoe and Dinah are part of an vigilante resistance group. I don't know why. Ignore the anti. Makes you wonder who else is a part of that. Like, there's still a lot to go on. Because it's interesting too, because like I said, there's the whole Argus angle, so that's not really a thing. Cause we also know, like, in that time period, John is gone. So what about John Jr., like all that? Like I said, there's the whole Oliver thing too. There's a lot to kind of break down about that too. Also, like Felicity being dead, which we know present day she's going after Diaz. That probably gets a little ugly, but it also turns down to whether or not the Green Arrow kind of has to probably hit these specific points at specific times, because it's like, this is about to go down now. If you don't hit this now and try to prevent this and stop this, it's going to lead to, because I'm sure like even probably got training before he came to present day, but like the Green Arrow is probably still, like, if it is William, is still probably heavily inexperienced, because even like the whole like trying to stop the fire, climbed up the pipe, pulled it off, and fell like that. I feel like that wasn't graceful at all. That shows very much inexperience, but obviously some athleticism and obviously some skill in that regard. So it's just kind of interesting. And on the other side of things, which all that kind of ties heavily into the whole Oliver situation, he gets visited by this Dr. Parker, which for me, immediately I'm like, is he supposed to be the demon? Because it's hard to say what his whole situation is. Is he legitimately a psychologist trying to do the right thing? Or is he just some jackass trying to do, because he's injecting Oliver, he's trying to make Oliver question everything, because it's like, oh, your dad, he wasn't a hero, he was a murderer, he killed his bodyguard and killed himself, and he put this sin on you. Everything you've done up to this point has been because of the mission he gave you. He had no right to give you that sin, and that sin's going to pass down to your family, your son. You wouldn't do that to your son either. Obviously, Oliver, under those circumstances, would have done the exact same thing of like, oh, I'm gonna kill myself to make sure that you survive, because someone has to, like, I have to make sure that you survive, you're my son and everything. But he didn't like push a mission on his William. It's like, I want you to be happy, you have a great destiny in front of you, essentially. So, but it was never like the mission like Oliver's dad pushed on him. And the doctor, it seems like obviously hooking up to the machine, like I said, the drugs and everything, even the whole like flickering lights and just the noise, you could tell it's meant to keep Oliver disorientated, make him kind of like awake. It seems like obviously this all ties together, but it's like a form of torture. So it's like, that's why I'm like, are you really a psychologist? Or are you hired by like the demon to kind of mess with Oliver to break him? Because it's so interesting, because obviously they're trying to go back to the point that started all of this for Oliver, and that's his dad. His dad was the foundation to everything that Oliver's built, from everything from Lian Yu to where he is right now, being the Green Arrow, was all built on the foundation of his father's mission. And it's like, you break that, you break the very essence of who Oliver is, because that part of him has become such a big part of him. It represents a good chunk of who he is. It's half of who he is. And you destroy that, maybe you destroy the man, and maybe that's kind of the whole point, because it's trying to get him to destroy his identity, because it's like at the end he's like, oh, I'm inmate, was it like 4587? And instead of being like, oh, I'm Oliver Queen like he was before, because it's just like the Doctor is pushing the buttons. But that's the thing though, like for him it's like, I don't know, because it seems like one angle of it, you're gonna be like, okay, I can kind of see him being like, oh, the fact of the matter is I really want to help you, and the fact of the matter is like this and this, the fact of the matter is you're prone to violence, and the fact of the matter is, and you're more likely to come back here, and you know what kind of effect that would have on your son. You don't want your son to have to go down the route you did. You won't want him to become a murderer like you, or following your footsteps. But he's like, my son's nothing like me. It's like, well, how would you know? Like, he could end up becoming like you because of all of this, which is like, so it's like, there's one side of me that's like, okay, I could see him being very psychological, but the way he's going about it is very shady, because it's also like, oh, I'm keeping you away from other people. It's kind of like, I think that kind of speaks volumes in itself. The question I'm wondering is Oliver playing alone because he knows this is the long game to get to the demon? Because like Oliver starts bringing up stuff is like, oh, Ricardo Diaz, but like immediately Parker changes the subject. It's like, oh, what are you going to do about Diaz? It's like, yeah, but you know, like there's no one really going to check on the fact is, so like, oh yeah, there's someone, oh yeah, you are a vigilante and people probably would come after your family. Like, it doesn't seem like anyone's really concerned about that angle. So it's hard, like I said, it's hard to say. We'll kind of have to wait and see in a long run what that ends up turning out to be. I'm very interested to see what the next episode has in store with all of this. Like I said, I'm hoping that Oliver isn't kind of breaking, that he is kind of playing this game, that he's, giving the Doctor what he wants, so the Doctor will, eventually let him out. That might be the whole point too, because the Doctor's like, oh, I'll let you back in with the other populace once I see this, and this, like the improved changes. And it's like, okay, so Oliver gives leeway, he can get freedom, and that can lead him that much closer to the demon. But it's like, yeah, coming to level 2, there was going to be a price to pay with all of this. So, like I said, it's just kind of interesting how that all kind of ties together potentially. Like, we're dealing with the future and everything, potentially William being the current, like future William potentially being the Green Arrow in present day. And, it's just like, oh, so worried about, it's like, oh, you worried about him going down your route. And that's kind of plays into what I was talking about earlier too, because it's like, if that is William under there, that kind of shows you the fact of the matter is he's beating out these bad guys, but he's not going to the extent, or he's not being anywhere close to as brutal as his dad is. Like, obviously William's going very, like, not passive, but he's going easier compared to like Oliver when it comes to a lot of stuff. So you kind of get what I mean, like, of like, oh yeah, so he's kind of going down his own route because of all this. But like I said, we'll have to wait and see. And now moving on to this week's episode of Legends of Tomorrow. So the team heads to 1977 London because there's the whole situation with the Queen. And it's like, oh, there's a mystical creature there. The Queen has kind of gotten a little crazy because she's fallen in with this band called the Smells, but they're kind of a new band. And now everyone's supposed to be going undercover. Initially, Constantine was going to, because he was like, oh, I used to be in a band, which is like, okay, so that plays into the whole like continuity of like, because once again, I'm guessing at this point in time, because no other stuff from the show Constantine has come up, I guess that continuity has been cut off. Like, the character is kind of pulled from that show, sure, but I think all that continuity associated with it is gone, because it seems like this is pulling from what's set up on the CW with this whole Arrowverse situation, like, because in the cartoon, like, that's how this whole thing started for him. Is the fact is that there's that whole he was in a band, and then there was the whole under the nightclub thing, everything went down. So it's kind of like, okay, so I think that's kind of further continuation of like, oh yeah, it's continuing that continuity in that regard. But I love that Constantine and Rory just don't get along, and it's like, is it just because Constantine has a tie on or something? It's like Mick has his weird things about why he doesn't like gel well with people, but I guess it's also just because like Constantine's like the new guy, and it's like he never gave Wally too much fluff, but I guess it's just Constantine rubs him the wrong way. I guess because they're kind of like very similar in some regards. I can't wait till we get the episode where those two end up bonding. I mean, because that was kind of like the thing from the beginning, like that's where Ray and Rory started off, and then like look where they are now. They're like real good buds too. So it's kind of like, you know, it's kind of interesting how that kind of works out like that. So I can't wait for the Constantine and Mick episode. I think that's going to be really interesting. But nevertheless, Ray is kind of forced to kind of be undercover with this situation. And he's like, I'm not Ray, I'm Rage. And he tries the whole like, because I love the whole thing of like, oh yeah, that Irish bloke, he's the leprechaun. And then like Zari's like, are you being serious or are you being racist? And he's like, both. I'm like, what? Okay. And then there's the whole situation of like, he actually tries it later on. Like, it's like, oh, this is about a leprechaun. And then Ray dumps the rice down. And it's like, oh, you have to count all of it. And he's like, wait a minute, you're trying the whole leprechaun thing. It's like Declan called him out for it. I was like, that's so interesting to me. Now we kind of find out later on why it didn't work. Because I was like, did he drop? Like, what happened with that? It's like, oh, because Declan, he's not even Irish. So, but he's definitely not a leprechaun and he's not even Irish. It turns out that all this group of rebels and stuff like that, like, oh yeah, we're going to here to wake people up. It's like each one of them is kind of like one was actually a nun and the other one was a mime before all of this. Cause like there's the whole thing of like, oh, Ray claimed he was against disco, but here's the photo of you banging with the discos, just because it's like, oh yeah, like, you know, the mission they were on before. And it's so interesting how that all, I was like, oh wow, that's so interesting that came up. Like, I mean, to be fair, it is the 70s, so of course they have access to that newspaper, especially because they made such a big spectacle and stuff like that. But Ray kidnapping the Queen's corgi and that being a whole thing, and Sarah helping out by beating the crap out of the dude, and Ray's just kind of like, oh man, you just asked nicely, and people just, yeah, just how that whole thing worked out like that. I thought it was kind of interesting. It was almost kind of like a horror movie type, like not necessarily a horror movie, but I just like the whole aspect of like just Sarah just pulling the dude in the bush and he's kind of flinging out and she's just dragging him back in and beat the smack out of him. But what I thought was kind of really interesting was like how Ray and Charlie ended up bonding. She ended up having his back no matter what. Because it turns out that she is the supernatural. She's a shapeshifter, which is very interesting. And she was actually kind of happy because Ray didn't get freaked out about what she could do. It turns out the queen that was kind of causing all this ruckus, that was her. I kind of figured as much. I was like, that has to be someone. Because at first I was like, is that Nora using a spell to pretend to be the queen? Just a whole like, oh, wearing jewelry and then just kind of going crazy like that. I was like, oh. You know, I was like, oh, it's something like, what's up with that? And it's like, okay, now it turns out, well, yeah, because it was Charlie the entire time. So, because for her, she's not going to go back. Which is so interesting, like her whole situation of she's kind of like a demon and stuff like that. I mean, to be fair, it's kind of interesting because obviously you look at the animated series and like Constantine has his whole situation with demons. I mean, to be fair, we don't know like, you know, what the timeline's like between like the continuity of like the cartoon and where he is right now in the Legends show. Maybe he's a lot less reluctant, less willing to kind of give these demons a chance, or any supernaturals from there a chance, because he just looks at them as all kind of abominations. But the whole situation where Ray suits up and he's like, I'm gonna show my friends that there's a different, like, no, like, because he's actually trying to protect her. I even love Rory being like, you've gone too far, Ray, because Ray got a tattoo of a corgi with a crown on and everything, and it's just like you ended up talking about the fact is that he's in too deep. It almost sounded like a cop drama of like, yeah, our undercover, he's going too deep, he's going to the dark side. It was I appreciate that aesthetic though. I thought it was kind of interesting. But like Ray, when he was blasting him, I was like, oh man, Ray. It's like, oh man, it's sad because I thought she was potentially good, but now it seems like she's controlling, because that's what Constantine was saying. It's like, oh yeah, bloody, terrible abomination or monster shapeshifters are. And then you kind of have like Zari being like, I thought you said it was a leprechaun. And he's like, whatever, you know. So Constantine not admitting when he's wrong. And also, apparently, you can't trust him, even though he's the supernatural expert. You can't trust him because it's like, oh yeah, this is a leprechaun. Should have figured as much, because, which kind of makes that statement go back a little bit worse. You're like, oh man, that means that was you just literally being like, oh, he's Irish. He's most likely a leprechaun. It's like, dude, that's super messed up. But it's like, oh man, Ray's being controlled. But it's like, nope, it's not Ray. It's the shapeshifter disguises him. The moment he made the suit fall off, I thought like, oh man, we're gonna have that situation of like they don't know which Ray's the real Ray, and it's like, nope, situation didn't turn into that. It was just like, nope, it immediately gets pinned against the wall. Side note, as I talked about, they didn't make much of a point of it, but it's kind of like, hey, Ray gave her a new one, so new device to hold the gem for her totem, so it's on her wrist now. So that's pretty cool. Because Ray was still kind of reluctant about sending her back to hell. Because once again, it's not like she did anything. Like humans locked her up because she was different. And it doesn't seem necessarily like she did anything. Like, I'm sure there are shapeshifters who've done terrible things. Which is interesting because because when I'm thinking shapeshifters, I'm kind of thinking of skinwalkers from Supernatural. And there's multiple reasons for that. One, the actor who played Michael's like human host body, from the alternate world, that actor, apparently he's the one that's coming after Constantine in this, which I thought once again, that whole someone from one show kind of comes up. Once again, all these shows are they're shot in the same place, Vancouver, and I'm sure it's all on the same lot too. So it's like, yeah, just kind of like all side by side. So it's just that whole networking thing and just being filmed in the same studio places and just areas and lots, blah, 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 blah. Nevertheless, but they actually kind of felt bad because it's like, yeah, she hasn't really done anything. She's caused a little mischief here and there, but she's never killed anyone. But the fact, like I said, like Constantine's so sure about it, so that must mean that they kill people a lot over the course of things. And another reason why I was tying it to Supernatural, getting back to what I was also saying, because in Supernatural, there's skinwalkers who, like, obviously it's not the same thing as this situation, but they tend to kill the person they are disguising themselves as. Typically, not always, but still. So it kind of made me kind of think of that in that regard, but nevertheless. And then she took on a Maya's form. I was like, oh man, and it's actually kind of getting to them. It's kind of messing with them. And I thought it was kind of interesting what Ray said. It's like, oh, she was like the moral compass. Like the team's kind of been a little off ever since she left, you know? And because I think Ray also kind of thinks about it too, in the sense of like, yeah, everything's not really 100%. I mean, obviously like Sarah's, her and Ava, their whole situation, and then Nate and his whole situation, and then the whole Maya situation. It's just like I said, the team probably just doesn't feel 100% right. Because I'm sure for Ray too, it's almost like everyone else kind of has something, and for him, it's kind of like I'm kind of here, and and it's like what kind of brought us together before. It's kind of we're slowly kind of pulling apart in different ways. I think that might be that's kind of the inkling I got from like the whole conversation. But she's trapped, looking like I saw, because I think is it Tala Ash? I think that's the actress's name. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's the actress who plays Amaya. I saw her name and I was like, oh, is that? It's like, oh, is she going to pop up in this episode? It's like, oh, you just saw her for that little bit. And I was like, okay. I was like, oh, I guess that was just kind of the only bit to it. And it's like, no, because of Constantine, she's stuck like that, which is like, oh, which is a shame just that she's not going to be stuck as Charlotte. I'm sure that's going to get undone, but it's like, oh, because the reason why I'm saying that, because like, obviously, like the main like poster slash like photo I've seen about this season showed Amaya, and that's why I was like, oh wait, so is Amaya in this season or whatever? And it's like, turns out not to be the case. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. So now they're stuck with a shapeshifter that looks like Amaya, which is a complicated situation because you already have the other situation with Nate. It wasn't until this episode that even before he said it, I was like, this has to deal with Amaya. It didn't cross my mind because it's like, right, this is like subsequently after they kind of broke up. Like, subconsciously, I think that was his main reason for not. Because I was like, yeah, you're up here, you're doing paperwork and stuff like that, yet you still want to be on with all the action and stuff. But it's like, if that's the case, why'd you leave the Wayfarer? It's like, because of Amaya. Like, that was your home for such a long time. And like, you spent so much time together. So everywhere you go just makes you think of Amaya. And I was like, right. Which is a complicated thing, is why Sarah was like, oh, you're trying to get over Amaya. That whole situation still bothering you. Oh, you're thinking that Amaya's not on the ship, huh? And it's like, yeah, no, you stay here. Cause it's just like, I want to see you grow. And she smiles and everything. And it's like, oh, I love it so much. Cause even Sarah at the beginning, I love it, was kind of giving Nate a hard time. She's like, really? Like, almost like, ew, gross. You're getting a desk job? Like, come on, Nate. We're the legends. We're doing our thing. It's like, all right, you stay here, and it's like, because I was wondering why Nate was so about it, because even he was like, yeah, it's not about necessarily helping out Ava, which, that's a side benefit to it, and also the whole situation between him and his dad. I was like, oh, because that's also a side benefit. So I was like, I thought his dad might have been the main motivation, but I was also thinking, like, oh, maybe he just doesn't want to be around the legends anymore. Maybe he's trying to go down a different path. But it's like, no, that's the main reason. It's just the whole Amaya situation. So that's definitely going to be a complicated situation when it arises, because Sarah doesn't want to bring that up, and it's which is interesting because the actress who plays Amaya, like I said, Tala Ash, she is British, if I remember correctly. She is so I think the accent she's using as quote unquote Charlie is kind of like her natural accent, which is kind of interesting when that happens from time to time with people. So I'm really interested to see what that ends up going. How that ends up turning about, especially because you have Constantine being who he is and her being who she is. It kind of makes like this situation, the dynamic on the legends, even more complicated, because you already have Mick and Constantine having their problems, and then you also have like now Constantine and Charlie. So there's a lot going on with that situation. What was also interesting was obviously the bonding between Gary and Nate, and like I said, Gary understood, because it's like, oh yeah, you and Amaya broke up, but he's like, hey, because I don't even think Nate really realized it until Gary pointed it out. I was like, because he's like, we didn't break up, we did it to save the timeline, which yeah, you did, but he's like, yeah, but still got to hurt, because the fact of the matter is she moved on, started with like a family immediately, which I was so certain that Nate was going to be the baby daddy in that situation. Turns out not to be the case. I mean, Kuwasa never really gave. I thought it was like, oh, Kuwasa just doesn't know. It's like, no, it's just because she knew. Like, so it's kind of like, it makes that situation even sadder, because there was a part of it that's like, oh no, there's no way. It's like, Nate's got to be like Mari and Kuwasa's grandfather. They just don't know it. It's like, no, that's not the case at all. So, I mean, granted, I guess there's still a possibility for that just no one knows about, not unless it's something Amaya kept secret from everyone, potentially. Because that's what I was also like, oh man, it's going to be crazy when Kuwasa's trying to kill Nate, not realizing he's her grandfather. Like, I kept seeing that multiple times last season, but nevertheless, seems less and less likely, but there's still a part of my brain that's like, they could be waiting to reveal it at any moment, but nevertheless. So, I'm very interested to see what they end up doing. Like I said, that situation just, I'll go ahead and finish my thought. Like, it's going to be interesting, because it's like, yeah, you have that character to a certain extent, but it's like, aside from shapeshifting, I wonder what Charlie's going to play. I guess it's just meant to be the whole complication, because it's not like, oh yeah, because like, it's not actually a Maya. There's no whole totem angle, which is interesting, because now we brought the totem bearers on the ship down to one with Zari, so. But yeah, like, the time bros between Gary and Nate. There was also that Mona situation, which is so interesting on many different levels. Like, you almost saw the kind of a little bit of a thing between her and Gary. It's like, oh yeah, because she was under the pressure. Oh, the time bureau, because Gary explained of like, oh yeah, we, the whole time zone thing. It's like, yeah, we handled that. And it's like, what about time zones and they go horizontally when you decide to go across country? It's like, they bonded, and then he wiped her memory. And it's like, oh, that seemed like that was going to be something, which, to be fair, maybe that would be something we see later on, where it's like, oh yeah, they bond and kind of potentially become a thing or something. The real interesting thing is the actress who plays Mona is the actress who plays, I'm probably blanking on her name, but Ramona, I think is her name, from Santa Clarita Diet. She popped up from time to time. Wasn't it like the Rite Aid, the store that everyone went to in that show? Like, she was the worker that would always kind of help and give unintentional advice to everyone. Obviously, she pops up a lot more in season 2 to play her role in that regard. I was like, what? Which is interesting, because like, she's very like almost emotionless in the show. So seeing her in this kind of all smiles and kind of happy and giddy, it was kind of weird for me. I'm like, this is weird, because I'm not used to seeing you like that, just because of the other character you play. It just kind of correlated in my head. That was just kind of an interesting thought process. Nevertheless, I also love that that plant apparently was a lot more dangerous than you kind of give it credit for, because like Ava, like the office a little messed up, Nate and Gary a little messed up, and I love that even Ava's like, oh my god, like, how do you, Sarah, handle reining in so many 5 legends? She's like, I literally have one in my office and it looks like this now. And it's like, yeah, I very loosely kind of have them reigned. And, because sometimes we have the tendency to kind of pull you in the right direction. I thought that's kind of pretty neatly put. So, but other than that, we also had this situation with Constantine. He ended up going to a bar and then Zari being like, oh, like the whole like, oh, what was it? Brooding anti-hero crap is gets the panties dropping or whatever. And Constantine's like, yeah, that lady you're talking about in this instance, that's my mom. And Zari's like, I really wish I didn't say that. And it was just kind of like this weird awkwardness to it, because I had a feeling like that was potentially his mom. It's like, oh. And also like his dad is like, and it was also shitty because his dad's like, oh yeah, my dad always called me killer. Always wanted to make sure I never forgot what I did because his mom died in childbirth because of him. I mean, granted, we don't know what the whole situation is like with his dad. I mean, I'd assume the way he was going to talk about it, it seems like his dad might still be alive. They just aren't good terms. But I love that he tried to kick his dad in the nuts to unbirth himself. Well, more so than anything, like, because he was saying it was just to kind of get his dad, but more so than anything, it was like you were trying to kind of erase yourself, because I think it's like he thinks that maybe if he erases himself, maybe I don't know if he expressly thought that far. It's just like I know he hated his dad, but he was kind of like, oh, gonna give him a a vasectomy of sorts with a swift boot to the balls. But it wouldn't work because of a paradox. Like basically because of it, it just wouldn't work. And it's so interesting because it's like, Azari's like, yeah, it creates a paradox because if you kick your dad in the nuts, there will be no one here to, try and kick your dad in the nuts, that whole thing. So it's like, time travel. Kind of have to learn the hard way with this whole thing, The supernatural and magic's his world, time travel, it's kind of the legends thing. I think that's going to be an interesting thing going forward because that was already kind of a bonding moment between Zari and Sarah, but I think we'll see that more like Zari kind of bonding with Constantine in that regard of like, it is interesting because Zari had talked about that and even Constantine had called it out about like, yeah, Sarah being kind of, that being a little hypocritical, like about, because it's like, oh, they assumed that, Constantine was going to go off and I guess kind of shag in the past or something like that. It's like, we can't have him doing that, which is interesting considering the fact is like, wasn't it one of the queens or something that Sarah hooked up with in the past? Like, I mean, literally in the past of the show, but also in the past. But it's just interesting because they're both in that same regard of like Constantine wants to change so much about his past, a past that he's keeping hidden from the legends. And Zari's got a lot of stuff about her life that she wishes she could change as well. But, they can't, it do too much damage to the timeline. But we see her kind of bond with him in the sense of giving him the photo of him and his mom because he never got to really know her. It has nothing of hers. So I love him being like, oh yeah, you're not going to, come over here and try to have this whole like friendly moment with me or whatever. And the whole friend stuff, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, nope, why would I do that? He's like, see, good thing you didn't do that. And she's like, yeah. And so I thought that was kind of a pretty nice bonding moment. But yeah, I'm very interested to see where all of this going to take us going forward into the next episode. I want to know how long it's going to be before Nate finds out about the whole Charlie situation, but also like what things at the Time Bureau are going to be like. Obviously, probably might see more with him and his dad potentially, maybe not. We'll kind of have to wait and see in that. But what's up with the Time Bros, like what their whole deal is going to be. Also, the fact is that Mick and Charlie would get along because even he's kind of like, oh, I kind of like her. Like, she's kind of like a rebel. And it's kind of like, yeah, he's like the most rebel up there on the ship. I also can't forget the fact is that Ray blurted it out about the whole him and Nora situation just because he was like, well, you don't think you know everything there is to know about me. And Sarah's like, this, and this, and this. Yeah, I know all there. And he's like, okay, I guess you do know a lot about me. But you don't know the fact is I'm the one who let Nora escape. It's like, just to prove her wrong about, like, there's more to me. I'm complex. He said that. But it's like, yeah, she deserves a second chance. We all got second chances, which is like, hey, I hope you're right about that. Which I'll go ahead and talk about it. Like, she's literally in the promotional material just like, Amaya, well, quote unquote, Amaya is. So it's like, I'm curious. I guess Eleanor's going to join the team too, which is going to be interesting. So I guess like the team is getting like a supernatural side of things, which is interesting because there's the whole Justice League Dark thing. Like, wasn't there a movie made about Justice League Dark? I saw something a while back about Justice League Dark. No, it was something animated that was on Cartoon Network. I don't know what it was specifically. I think it was connected to the whole, what was it? that Justice League action. I think it was tied to that, maybe. Nevertheless, I wonder is that what they're kind of doing right now? They're kind of setting up Justice League Dark Potential. I don't know. Like I said, we'll just kind of have to wait to see what goes down in the next episode with all of this. So, but really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.